Hi everyone, my name's Robin Lewis, and in this video I'm making this box using mited corners and hand-cut splines. I really struggled to find information on the best approach to cutting these splines by hand, and I think that's because most of the time people are going to use either a table saw or a router table. That's going to be the quickest and most accurate way of putting in splines. But I have neither of these tools, so I just had to give it a go, and I'm actually quite happy with how it turned out. I've made one of these boxes before at a workshop put on by Studio Doubled, a woodworking studio here in Townsville. But the workshop was very high level and we were mostly just assembling parts. I wanted to make this box completely from scratch. I had these old silky oak window shutters, and after running them through the thicknesser they revealed some pretty good looking wood. After that I could use the flat face on my jointer to square up an edge. As a contrasting piece, I used some Tasmanian oak around the opening of the box. I chose this timber for a few reasons. It's easy to get in Australia and it kept the tone of the box light. I also wanted to use it where the lid sat, so there was a bit more strength. Tasmanian oak is a fair bit harder than silky oak, so the edge of the box would last a little longer. At this stage I only had two faces and one square edge. To get all the boards to the same height, I ganged them together and ran them through the thicknesser. This is probably a job more suited to a table saw, but I was pleasantly surprised by how well it worked. Now I could cut the slot for the plywood bottom and a rebate at the top of the box for the lid. I used a combination of a clamp and a piece of timber clamped on the other side of the workbench. This meant I could push towards the board at all times. Then I sanded the inside of the boards up to 320 grit. This would have been a nightmare if I'd tried to do it when the board was all glued up. To cut the boards at 45 degrees, I used a sacrificial piece of MDF to create a zero clearance fence. I clamped a stop block as well as the fence to the miter saw and made the two shortcuts. There wasn't a particular size that it had to be, so anywhere around 180 millimeters was fine. The main thing was that both short sides and both long sides were the same length, respectively. The long sides needed a slightly different approach to the stop block, so I made an elbow out of some scrap and screwed it into my workbench. I went with plywood on the bottom because I wanted to rely on it for strength. Normally, with a solid wood base, you would need to give it some space to move around and expand. In my case, I glued the plywood in place with a very tight fit. This would hold the box together, and because it's plywood, it won't expand. For the glue up, I used a trick that I learned at the box making course I did earlier this year. Packing tape is a great way to clamp a box. Run the tape over the box once with a small amount of tension, but after that come back and stretch the tape around. This type of tape has a lot of flex in it, so if you pull it, it'll act like a clamp. It's a good idea to put the tape around the top as well as the bottom. I went back later and added that. While the box was drying and I had a final dimension to work with, I started on the lid. I used some more Tasmanian oak, which I glued together to make the lid blank. I left that to dry overnight, and in the morning I could get back onto the box and start work on the hand-cut splines. I started by using a chisel slightly narrower than the size of the splines to mark out the spot that the saw would finish the cut. It's important to measure this off the corner from the top or the bottom, so you make sure you don't cut through into the box. Once I cut the fibers using the chisel, I could then square some lines and use those for the saw cuts. Then, using the same chisel, I could remove the corner material. Keep flipping the board around because you want to work into the middle of the corner. Going past that could end up with some tear out. I also made sure the notch was slightly concave. This probably doesn't help the strength, but at least I know the splines would bottom out at the ends of the notches, not in the center. Because of the hand cutting process, the notches weren't all the same. This meant that each spline had to be cut to size individually. I used some more Tasmanian oak and fine-tuned each spline on the belt sander. Then, using more glue than you normally would, I added the splines. The reason for the extra glue is I wanted to make sure any gaps were filled, so when I cut the splines back later, they would either be wood or glue. Then I could turn my attention back to the lid and cut it down to size. After cutting the ends, I measured the width of the sides and used the jointer to bring it down close to the line. The final finessing was done with a hand plane. Then I cut the splines, rounded the edges, and did a lot of sanding. And finally, I finished it all off with some tung oil. So were the hand cut splines cut perfectly? Well, not really, but I'm pretty happy with them. So my name is Robin Lewis. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.